This is every book I read in 2023. Yes, so today I'm going to be going through every book that I read this year. I'm going to be showing you them, so some of them have some interesting releases, and I'll be talking a little bit about them. I'll put timestamps for each different book, so at the start I'll probably just talk very vaguely about them, but then I might want to do a little bit spoilery-ish talk. So then if you haven't read them yet, and you don't want any spoilers at all, you can just skip ahead to the next book, you know. Today I'm only going to be talking about the actual books, the novels I've read, nothing else, like manga, which still does make up the majority of what I read. But I'll do a separate video on that, my manga reading log. The start of next year I'll go through that, but that video will be a little different. Both of these videos are probably going to be long, but this one I'm going to actually talk about the books a bit, say what I like about them and stuff. Whereas my manga reading log, I will sort of just be saying everything I read, just reading off a list basically and showing the covers, and so there'll be very different vibes, you know. 2021 was the great reading hiatus, where I barely read anything the entire year. So in 2022 I wanted to make a conscious effort to try and read more, these things that I want to read, to get around to it. And I did, but it was mostly manga that I read last year. I only read like 2 actual books, and I wasn't satisfied with that. So this year, 2023, I wanted to make a conscious effort to try and read more actual novels. Initially, my goal was to read like at least 1 book a month, but give myself a leeway if I missed a couple months. So I said 10 books. That was my target, which I smashed. Very, very early in the year, I made a Goodreads account, and I started documenting, you know, cataloguing everything I read, because there's no reason to read unless you catalogue everything. That's half the fun in it. That's like the entire point. But anyways, on Goodreads they had like a thing, like a reading goal thing you could set for yourself, and for some reason at that time I thought, actually I think I might be able to read closer to 2 books every single month. So I set my goal for 18 books, which as the year went on I was like, ugh, it seems like I'm going to fall a bit short, around 15 or 16, and then it looked like maybe I'll fall agonizingly short. I'll only get to like 16 or 17, but now it looks like I'm going to hit it. I'm going to hit the goal exactly of 18 books. So, cool. Some of them are a lot shorter though. I think next year I'm going to try and prioritize reading some of the longer books that I've got. That I want to read something like American Psycho, but I just look at the length and it's a daunting task to begin. So I want to commit to reading some even more longer books that I already have and want to read. I want to get around to actually reading them. I'll still read, you know, some shorter stuff too. And obviously I'll still read lots of manga. Anyways, that's enough rambling of an intro. Maybe you already skipped this, but the point I want to make is, the real point of this video, it's more cataloguing, like on Goodreads, it's cataloguing what I've read in video form, but really what it's about is showing how much I read, which proves that I am better than you inherently, because you don't read, do you? And if you do read, you didn't read 18 books, did you? So that means I am inherently better than you. Unless you did read more than 18 books, in which case, nerd? Get a life, what's wrong with you? Don't you have anything better to do with your time? In January, I read The Time Machine and A Study in Scarlet. The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, and yes, I did choose to read this because it was featured in Better Call Saul, somewhat prominently in the final season. But yes, Better Call Saul, that is the reason I chose to read it. But I'm very glad I did, because I very much enjoyed it. After the first little bit of setup, basically the entire story is told through the perspective of one guy that has built a time machine, allegedly, and went on a insane journey to the very, very distant future. You know, I feel like a lot of time travel stories, if you go into the future, it's like 1,000 years, or a few thousand years, or 10,000 years. This one, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like significantly far into the future, to the point where what humans had become was drastically altered, but in a way that felt very real or realistically possible, especially over such a long span of time. I don't think H.G. Wells invented the concept of time travel, but I do believe it is my understanding that he coined the term the time machine with this book. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm sure enough that I don't care. I'm just going to state it as fact, and so, yeah. Pretty sure, but yeah, it's really a gripping tale, and it's interesting to watch as he sort of, through him, we slowly learn about this world and his misconceptions of it, and the classism, and Weena! Was that her name? Was it Weena? Oh, Weena and his relationship, and then when he goes even really far into the distance, and the crabs. Honestly, this might have been one of my favourite books I read all year, and it was the first book I read. But the second book I read was the first Sherlock Holmes novel, A Study in Scarlet, and this is hardcover, and it come with this clear slip cover too. I'll take off. Late last year I read The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, which is the first short story collection of Holmes, but this novel, as well as the second novel, came out before that, but I read the short stories first, and now I'm coming back and reading this in January. I already read it. Anyways, yeah, so about Christmas time last year, I was in the bookstore. I was specifically looking for this because I had been reading The Adventures of Sherlock, so I wanted to get, the first novel and read that later. And I couldn't find it. I was just looking in the classic book section. I couldn't find it. So then I went to another section and I couldn't find it. I'd basically given up and I was leaving. And as I was leaving, I was glancing at the classic book section. I saw it there. I was like, oh, there it is. A Study in Scarlet. And oh, what a perfect edition. I love green's my favourite colour. Nice hardcover with the green, but then the icing on the cake, we got the pink pages, the pink edged pages. That is beautiful. I love this edition so much. It's got A Study in Scarlet as well as The Sign of the Four, and then as well as it's got like a few just random stories from The Adventures of Sherlock short story collection. Not all of them, just a few select ones. Anyways, I enjoyed A Study in Scarlet. I didn't enjoy it as much as the short story collection, but it's a good introduction. The one part of the story I actually really liked is when you basically got Sherlock, we get introduced to him and he's solving this case, and then right up he gets to the point of basically solving it, the story changes and goes way back into the past. And it's like a completely different story, but it's really the showing the backstory of the murder plot, the person who perpetrated it, his backstory and his reasons for committing this crime. And then once we sort of tell that story, we then jump back to the Sherlock presence and sort of wrap things up in a neat little bow. I've seen some people not like that part because it completely sort of changes the tone and has no Sherlock in that, but I found that part to be the most enjoyable part of the book. It was a really nice change of pace, and I think Arthur Conan Doyle is a good writer, and it was just interesting to see, because all I've read of him still to this day, all I've read of him is his Holmes stories, so that little part was, I thought it was a really nice change of pace. Also, I'm a bit of an idiot. When it starts off, you sort of don't know, but very early on, I think in the first chapter of that sort of middle different story, it mentions a name or something that sort of reveals, oh, this is a backstory with like the people that were killed and then the person who kills them. But I sort of didn't recognise the names, because names are just, who gives a fuck about names? So I didn't really realise. It wasn't until right towards the end, and then I was like, oh, that's the two guys. Oh! So for me, it was even more mind-blowing when I got to that, because I just thought initially, I thought that this was just some weird thing where the Sherlock Holmes part just ended on a very vague note, and maybe you had to analyse it further yourself to sort of figure out the killer. And then this was a completely different story that was bundled in. A Study in Scarlet was like two completely different stories just combined together. I'm somewhat of an idiot. So when I finally made the connection, it was a mind-blowing moment. And I'm beginning to think this video is going to be way too long, but who cares? In February, I read one book, The Sign of the Four. It's also within this book. The Sign of the Four is the second Sherlock Holmes novel. I've seen it called The Sign of the Four and The Sign of Four. What is it called in this book? In here it's The Sign of the Four, so we'll go with that. I think overall I didn't quite enjoy it as much as A Study in Scarlet, but it's still pretty good. It follows a similar format where you've got sort of the case and everything leading up to it, and then once you get to the conclusion, you get a big backstory behind the motives and intentions of the perpetrator. But this one is a little different. In A Study in Scarlet, it went to like a completely different story with chapters, and like it was its very own thing, whereas this one, you sort of get this one really long chapter at the end of the guy explaining it. One thing I really loved in The Sign of the Four, though, was the first chapter where we look at and it introduces Sherlock Holmes' cocaine habits, which I just thought was fascinating to read. It was such an interesting trait to add to the character. I think it was the best chapter in either of the two books was that chapter, introducing that and Watson's comments on it. Some people were offended by portrayals of certain races and that in A Sign of the Four, as well as actually I've seen people offended A Study in Scarlet because in the middle section it introduces this like cult, but they're the Mormons. But I don't think it's a very accurate portrayal of what Mormons are really like, no matter how you feel about Mormons. But personally, I don't really give a fuck. It's fiction, and they were both very interesting tales. In March, I read A Game of Chess and Other Stories, and I Will Forget This Feeling Someday. Game of Chess and Other Stories by Stefan Zweig. It's a nice looking cover. I've seen the chess story called many different things, from the Royal Game to the chess story, or a chess story. But this translation calls it A Game of Chess. It's got 4 short stories in it. The Invisible Collection, 24 Hours in a Woman's Life, Incident on Lake Geneva, and A Game of Chess. 2 of them are pretty short, like around 10 to 20 pages, while the other ones are long, more like that 50 to 60 page range. I'm not sure which is my favourite story. Initially, I think as soon as I finished reading it, I thought the final one, A Game of Chess, was my favourite, and it is really good. But I don't know, that may have just been because it was the last story, and it was the titular story that I was being influenced. I don't know, because 24 Hours in a Woman's Life is a really great story as well. Plus, I also have a special place in my heart for the Invisible Collection. As a fellow collector of things, I felt it was very intriguing and such a unique, interesting premise where you got, this blind guy who has a collection of things and he's so proud of them, even though he's lost his sight, he can no longer see them. And little does he know that his family has actually sold this collection that he still thinks he has because they needed it. They were desperate for money. And he's still enamored by them and just overjoyed. And he's got this collection. He's looking at this collection of just nothing. It's almost like it's an invisible collection. Yeah, I don't know. I really can't pick a favourite. I can tell you it's not Incident on Lake Geneva, which is the shortest story by far. It's okay, but I don't know. I just didn't particularly care for it that much. But yeah, I really enjoyed the writing in this. Stefan Zweig is an interesting fellow. I also read I Will Forget This Feeling Someday by Yoru Semino. She or he, I don't know what the author's gender, I don't think anyone knows. If you tell me you know, I don't believe you. I think you just think you know, but you're not actually 100% sure. Anyway, Yoru Semino, this is the first novel of theirs I've read, but there's a few manga adaptations of their books that I've read before. Back in like 2020, I think I read I Want to Eat Your Pancreas. And last year I read I Had That Same Dream Again. It was my favourite thing that I read all of last year. So this is the first true Yoru Semino work I've read. There's no manga version of this, but I really liked it. Shocker. Phenomenal insight. I really liked it. Well, I actually did 2 reviews on this for reasons that can only be known if you've seen the reviews. But if you do want sort of a more super in-depth review, you could check either of those out. But it's got this main character who's very edgy and angsty. When I read the first chapter, I was like, this might be... He was a little much. I was a little worried that the book was going to go in a way. But I don't think it did. I mean, he obviously is a lot like that. But I mean, there's a lot of kids or teens that are like that. Later on, there is a time skip and he gets older and doesn't have that same teenage angst, but he still clearly hasn't moved on from that era of his life and he's trapped, and the way he's portrayed in that second half is just it's just fascinating. you can't look away. Also a romantic sort of subplot, which is as frequent in a lot of Yuri Samina works, where he meets this, sort of the initial crux of the story is him meeting this girl, this, you know, it's this supernatural way. Once that's gone away, he can never move on, and he's sort of stuck and haunted by his own past and his past actions, and eventually he suffers an ego death. I don't really know what that means exactly. Don't know if I'm using it in the technical sort of correct way that it's usually used, but he clearly has an ego. He's grown to think that he is special and he's different than everyone else, and that ego crumbles down before him in a whatever. Here's some great insight for you. I really liked it, despite it having been seemingly one of the least liked Yuri Samina works, based off just a generalized gleam of other reviews. Obviously, I haven't read a lot of Yuri Samina works, so I'm not the Yuri Samina expert that I would like to be someday. But at this stage, I very much enjoyed this. Oh, there's also an accompanying album that you can listen to while you read it. It's only like an EP, so it's kind of short, so it repeats a lot, but it's nice music too. April, I read one book, The Gift of the Magi. Penguin softbound classic or something, so it's pretty small. It's a collection of 12 short stories. The first one being the titular Gift of the Magi, which I think is the most famous one, by Mr. O. Henry from the O. Henry Candy Bar Fortune. I'm 100% confident in that fact. They're very short stories, and I enjoyed most of them. My favourite one by far was, is it The Last Leaf or The Final Leaf? The Last Leaf. That was my favourite one by far. Oh, fantastic. But overall, I felt like, because I assume when these were originally published, they were probably published like in a magazine, you know, just one at a time, like weeks or months apart. And I think having them all here in this collected edition and reading them all sort of back to back, you know, reading like one or two a day in a row, one after the other, sort of hurts each of the stories. They sort of follow somewhat of a similar formula at times. They all have this sort of twist ending that I think individually, looking at each individual story, the twist endings are fantastic and they're great. It works well. But reading them together, you start to notice a pattern and you can sort of almost predict the endings, and it gets, a little predictable. I think it would be better if you didn't read this all at once. If you read like one story and then don't come back to it for another month or so and then read another story. Like really stretch it out. The longer you take in between stories, the better it would be. As I said, my favourite was The Last Leaf, but some of my other favourites, I think the titular one, Gift of the Magi, is good. Two Thanksgiving Day Gentlemen was a really simple but interesting story about some guy who always buys a homeless guy a big meal on Thanksgiving, but for some reason this year, what had happened, I think he bought someone else a meal, or he had already had a meal, but the homeless guy had also already got a meal brought to him, but they both didn't know and they didn't want to disappoint the other one, so they both still got a meal together. And I don't know if you've ever eaten something and been very full and then you try to eat something else, but it is like extremely painful. It's not easy actually. So it was just a comical and quirky little story. The Last Leaf are the best though, so emotional, about a girl who's dying and she's sort of looking at this tree and it's losing its leaves. And now I'm basically just spoiling the story. Should I even say I'm about to spoil? I'm not about to offer any analytical insight. I'm just about to say what happens in the story. So maybe I shouldn't say. If you want to, just read The Last Leaf. If you want a taste of the story, you can find it. Maybe I'll do an audiobook reading of it one day. In May, I read one book, Meet Me at the Borderline, which was actually written by my friend. It's a friend of mine that wrote this. It's even signed, so I'm epic. It's not a novel. It is, as stated here, a collection of prose, thoughts, and emotions. So many emotions. It's basically a collection of poetry. I don't really know what prose is. You know, I did in year 12. You have to do English. It's sort of compulsory as a class, but you cannot do it if you choose to do literature instead, which is, I guess, considered a more advanced English. But I did both English and literature, and I still have no fucking idea what prose means. I'm sort of an idiot. I don't know what words mean, but basically it's a bunch of poetry in here. Because of my friendship to the author, who I'm very proud of for publishing this, it's pretty cool. I think it's, yeah, that they actually did this. I mean, you could buy this at Booktopia. You could buy it. It was also on Book Depository, but they don't exist anymore. So, but the point I was going to say is, I'm not really going to talk about how much I loved it or hated it or was middle of the road about it, because, you know, if I give it too much overwhelming praise, you're just like, wow, you're just friends with him, you're just saying that. If I'm too overly critical, it will just be awkward, even though I don't think they'd ever see this video. Hopefully, if they ever see this video, there's a lot of other problems with the other videos they could be seeing on this channel. Anyways, I will read one of them. I'll read my favourite one. I think it was called Prayer? Yeah, here, Prayer. This was my favourite one, so this is a little excerpt for you to give you a little taste of it. Prayer. Father, forgive me, for I have sinned. I lied to him last night, but the risk of going to hell seemed better at the time. Pretty short one. There's a lot of ones that are that short, but there's also ones, as you can see next to it, that are longer, but they're all contained to a single page. If you want to know how good it is or how bad it is, you can buy it yourself. Go buy it, support it, and check it out and see if you like it yourself. It is on Booktopia, but I think that only ships to Australia, and it was on Book Depository, but they don't exist anymore. You could buy it. So I don't know, maybe you can get it on Amazon. I know she also sells it on Etsy. I don't know if she would ship to internationally or not, but you can check it out. Meet me at the borderline. Look into it. In June, I read nothing. Oy, oy. In July, I read Survivor and Breakfast at Tiffany's. Survivor by Chuck, not the McGill one. Chuck, the one that wrote the original Fight Club novel. I've never read Fight Club, but I have watched Fight Club, and that is why I decided to pick up this one. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to read the book I already saw as the movie, so I'll just buy one of his other books and see what it's about. I started reading this back in late 2020, I think, and I read a little bit of it and I enjoyed it, but for some reason I put it sort of on hold, and then I never got back around to it. So finally this year I'm like, alright, let's fucking read this thing. I started from the start again so I could refresh my memory, and yeah, I really like it. That's sort of a common theme for pretty much nearly all these books. It's pretty much all of them is like, yeah, I really liked it. There might be a few that are like, I loved it. There was nothing I really hated. I'm somewhat of a simpleton. I'm easy to please. But yes, you can definitely see some similarities, even though I haven't read Fight Club, but from the movie version. You can see some sort of similarities in the dialogue and certain writings. The main character is sort of this guy that was part of this cult-like thing. And anyway, the cult's been broken up. It's been exposed, I guess, and all the members, the past members, are killing themselves, except for this guy. He ends up as the only survivor, and then in the second half of the book, he gets propped up as this media celebrity figure. And that's when things, I think, really get interesting, and we watch as he, you know, gets injected with steroids and all sorts of stuff and forced to work out, and he talks about his own appearance just changing drastically, his head getting all TRT, growth hormone head getting all big and becoming this unrecognisable freak as he's paraded around on stages, giving speeches and becoming sort of almost religious figure and inevitable downward spiral. They also do the Fight Club thing where the end of the book is the first chapter at the start of the book, and then you come back to it at the end again. The ending's good, but I actually heard some more, like, I was reading online about some things about the ending, that it's inferred that there might be some trickery at play. It's definitely not super evident, and I think the more straightforward literal reading of the ending is also just a good and interesting ending. But the other ending, yeah, it's a little, I think the author may have come out and said it, like stated it categorically. I don't know if he's trolling or not, but I believe I heard that he had said in a blog post or something like, no, that's supposed to be the ending, this secret twist where, to spoiler it, he's in a plane and it's going down anyway. He's basically going to kill himself, and he's telling his story to the black box. That is the whole book. And at the end, we come back to that, and he basically goes down and crashes. But the other interpretation of the ending that may be the actual ending is that there was trickery. He recorded himself. There was a very brief mention of like a tape recorder being amongst possessions of some, you know, random person with the plane before he hijacked it and kicked them all off, and then kicks the pilot out. So it's inferred, allegedly, that he records the part of this he records on that, and he has it playing for the black box, so then he can jump out of the plane, and then his voice is still playing on the black box through the recorder, but it sounds like he's there, so it seems like the perfect way to fake he's deaf, so he can disappear, which I guess is a more interesting ending, but I definitely didn't come to that conclusion myself. Did I mention I'm an idiot? But no, I think a lot of people wouldn't come to that conclusion, but it certainly adds another layer to things. I also read Breakfast at Tiffany's. It's another one of those miniature penguin cloth-bound classics. It's about the intriguing Holly Golightly, and yes, I did choose to read this because I saw like a clip of the Seinfeld episode where George was supposed to read it, and I was like, nah, why don't I read it? Fred's gay, George. Is Fred actually his name? I don't think the character has the name. I think Fred might be the actor that plays it in the movie. But I don't know if Fred is gay. People say that, I don't really think it fucking matters, to be honest. But he is clearly somewhat obsessed and very intrigued in this Holly Golightly, and it's all through his perspective of her fascinating existence to him and to the others around her. And I agree that it is fascinating, especially since it's very well written. I was also worried about, because I had saw something, partially spoiler, but not really, of someone commenting like, oh, I really felt bad for the cat. And then you get introduced to the story that Holly Golightly has a cat, and I was really worried. I was like, oh no, she's going to like, in a fit of alcoholic or drug-induced, zoned out, she's going to like abuse this cat or something, like kill it or just abuse it badly, or she's going to like take off, disappear and leave it locked in her apartment, and it's going to be neglected and malnourished, or something's going to happen horrible to this cat. But when you get to the end, actually, I don't think it's horrible at all. I mean, it can be definitely considered a little bittersweet, but I think it's a pretty beautiful ending. Basically, she has to take off because of a big twist that happens. But she has to take off. She has to go on the lam, and she decides she needs to get rid of her cat. She's not going to be able to bring it with her, so she basically drops it off in an alley and gives it the old shoo, and the cat wants to stay, and you're like, "Daddy, don't come back!" You have to be stern with it to make it go away, even though you don't want to, you know. But as soon as she does that, they start to drive off, and she realizes she's made a mistake. She's crying. She wants the cat, so they go back to get it, and they just can't find it, and they're searching for it, and they can't find it, and it's gone. But then at the very end of the book, the main guy looks up into a window of a rather wealthy apartment and sees the cat in there, in a warm home, being taken care of. And he compares it to Holly Golightly, who he hasn't seen or heard from, and hopes that she's found a home somewhere. And I think it was a beautiful ending with the cat. It's why I teared up greatly, you know, at that. It was a beautiful ending. I think it was. And yes, I cry at books, which once again means I'm inherently better than you. Unless you also cry at books a lot, which in case, what are you, a fucking loser? Anyway, one thing I have to say about this edition in particular is it's censored in a ways that infuriate me. I mean, there's no way that a book could be censored in a way that wouldn't infuriate me. But anyway, basically, a character says the N-word and it's censored. It's just like N underscore. And see, this is the problem. When I first read it, I didn't even know if it was supposed to be censored or if they went to start saying something and got cut off, you know, like, oh, there's something or other, and then someone sort of interjects and they don't finish their sentence. But I was like, I don't know. Listen, I bought the book, okay, motherfucker. I don't need you to censor words on a page for me. Because here's the thing. Either I know what the word says, in which case, what does seeing the extra letters make a difference? Or I don't know. In this case, I was a little confused, in which case it's confusing. It makes it difficult to read. I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I wasn't sure if it was meant to be like that. Like, maybe it was censored in the original release, but I looked online and it definitely appears not to be. But later on, it happens again, and that's when I realized, no. This is... what the fuck is this bullshit? And I had to look it up and check. But then later on again, there is an F word censored, which I didn't check, but contextually within the context of what was happening, I think it must have been just fuck. Just the fuck word, not the faggot word. But that's another thing. Oh, you got F underscore. It could be fuck, could be faggot, could be fucking fanook. Who fucking knows? That's another problem. Like, either we know what the word is, in which case, why are you censoring it? Anyway, we know what it is. Just because, like, seeing the extra letters isn't gonna, if we know what it is, or we don't know which it is, in which case you need to put the full word because we don't know what it is, or else we don't know what the fuck we're reading. Besides of which, I just don't want you to censor my fucking books anyway. I don't give a fuck. N-words, F-words. But seriously, fuck. You're censoring fuck. If you are going to do that, you need to, like, put it... Like a big... you see this big sticker with a price tag? Well, put a big sticker like that on the front that says, this is a child-friendly book. In which case, I'm sure children can handle a single fuck and a couple of other words that I'll only say off camera. But it's fucking bullshit. If I had known that, I wouldn't have bought this edition. I would have bought a different edition of the book. And I probably will avoid getting these Penguin Clothbound classics. Anyway, yeah, it really pissed me off. So as much as I love Breakfast at Tiffany's, it's a very nice short, I think it's called a novella. I think that means short novel. Anyways, I very much love the story and would recommend it, but I wouldn't recommend this edition. It's, you know, it's small and it's censored in stupid ways that just hurt the flow of the story, and it's annoying. And stop babying me, Penguin. Fuck you. In August, I read nothing. In September, I read 3 books. Animal Farm, The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, and The Hound of the Baskervilles. Animal Farm is a classic by George Orwell. This edition's nothing to write home about. It's pretty cheap. I bought this years ago. Back when I read 1984, like back in, was it 2019 or 2020 maybe? 2018 at the earliest-ish. I bought this like shortly after because I very much enjoyed it. And this one was pretty short, so I was like, oh yeah, I'll read it. And then I just never got around to reading it. Until now! Until September! I finally read it. And it's fucking great. I'm actually... 1984, I think, was one of my favourite books when I read it. I'd have to reread it to sort of figure out how much I love it. But just off reading this, honestly, it's like, it might be better. I don't know. It's really well told, and the use of the animals and watching them go through this whole, you know, overthrowing the farm and then slowly building things up, and the different animals doing different tasks, you know, who was what and doing it was epic. And the scoundrel, those few scoundrel pigs, I forget the name. What the fuck was his name? Napoleon? That's right, Napoleon was the real motherfucker. But that one horse that I forget his name was like fucking, he was the goat. But he wasn't a goat, he was a horse. And the donkey was the wise old sage. He was pretty epic. You know, it's really just a tale about animals having fun on a farm. No deeper meanings at all. No. But it's fantastically told, fantastically written. Just looking at it on a surface level, it is well told. But obviously, it's pretty obvious when the sheep are just and greeting things, and watching as propaganda spreads and things are memory hold. It's yeah. It took. It's yeah. That's the best sort of insight you'll ever find on YouTube for Animal Farm, the book. It's yeah. I think we should just move on. We then read The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. This is the second Sherlock collection of short stories of Sherlock. It's a very nice release. These are like the Wordsworth collector's editions or whatever. Hard cover, no drawstring, which is unfortunate. So the way with Sherlock, the first thing that came out was The Study in Scarlet, the novel, then A Sign of the Four, the novel, then The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, the short stories, then The Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, more like 12 or something, or 13 short stories. And this was the final thing of Sherlock. He kills Sherlock off in the final story, which introduces this Moriarty, who, despite, I think, Moriarty's prominence in other Sherlock things, like any TV show and movies, he has not appeared in a single Sherlock piece of media until this very final short story, in which Sherlock... I thought it was really well done. I think it was pretty good. That story, was it The Final Problem or the final... It can't be The Final Solution. It must be The Final Problem. Actually, it could be The Final Solution. It predates all that. What is it? The Final Problem. The Final Problem. Okay. It's The Final Problem. Basically, Moriarty is revealed to be this criminal mastermind equivalent to Sherlock Holmes' intellect. Sort of just comes out of nowhere, but I feel like they do a good enough job explaining it, especially since was originally supposed to be the final story. And it's revealed that he's had his hands in a lot of the criminal underworld. Anyway, then Sherlock has been building a case against him and is ready to drop the bomb and swoop up all these people, Moriarty most importantly. But Sherlock sort of realizes that Moriarty's too smart. He's not going to get caught. He's going to escape and he'll get away and he'll hide, but he'll keep his dirty little fingers around and keep wreaking havoc. So there's a big confrontation. Anyway, basically Sherlock grabs him and just jumps off a cliff and kills himself, which is kind of crazy for a Sherlock ending, but I kind of like it. It's like a send-off for the character. But later on, they would bring the character back, and I haven't read that yet. I'll probably read that next year, so to get to that. But I'm worried about how they do it. Like, any way they bring him back, won't that ruin the ending of the final problem? Like, how is it that he faked his death, and why? At that point, he didn't commit murder-suicide. He just killed a guy and went into hiding. Or did Moriarty survive too? Like, I don't know. I'm a little concerned about reading that. Also, since there seems to be an obvious way if you wanted to bring Sherlock back, just bring him, which I don't think he wanted to. I think it was financial reasons and public pressure that forced Mr. Sir Arthur. Who sirred him? When did he get knighted? I think it was pressure that forced him to bring him back, or just financial reasons. But if you're going to bring him back, why did you have to bring him back alive? You could just make up a bunch of cases that happened, because Watson is always telling these cases, but he skips some, and you can just go back, oh, there was a case I forgot about. I didn't think it was interesting enough at first, but the more I've thought about it, it is interesting, and just, invent new cases. I mean, at some point, it would get ridiculous inventing so many new cases, but I don't know if it could get any more ridiculous than bringing him back to life. But I haven't read the story, how they bring him back to life, so I don't know. But overall, I thought this short story collection was pretty damn good. Not as good as the first short story collection. Anyway, then, still in September, I read This is the return of Sherlock, The Hound of the Baskervilles. It's another Wordsworth collector's. A beautiful looking cover and edition. Hardcover. We love that. But this one, so this was like maybe 10 or so years after this one coming out, and it was the return of Sherlock, but it wasn't the return. It was set before he died, which, like I said, if you want to do more Sherlock ones, just do that. But I think this is really good. I think this might be my favourite overall Sherlock story out of all of them, rivaled only maybe by the Adventures of Sherlock short story collection. This one's unique where it spends a lot of time with Watson. There's a big middle section where there's just no Sherlock at all, which I thought was just an interesting change of pace. It was refreshing. And Sherlock does make he does come back towards the end of the story in just a typical classic Sherlock fashion. That was a nice little twist. One thing with this one, it's got sort of a bit of a supernatural vibe, but not really, where you've got this Hound of the Baskervilles, which is this sort of mysterious, demonic, massive hound creature that is stalking this family lineage and causing their deaths. Howldog. And it does sound very, ridiculous in a sense, supernatural, and you're like, has Sherlock jumped the shark? Or are these people all just, crazy? I mean, tales of ghosts and that exist, whether ghosts are real or not. You see, with this demonic hound, I was sort of expecting one of the reveals to be, whoever the perpetrator was, to have some big, cardboard contraption. They're doing a puppet show with this hound, and it would be kind of like a ridiculous reveal. It'd be like, oh, doesn't sound convincing. Or he's got some dog suit, this man who's sneaking around or whatever. But in the end, the reveal of what the hound is, the twist ends up sort of being that there's no twist. There really is a hound. And there is some little, there's some trickery going on there to spice up the hound a bit. But there really is a hound. And you get a scene where Sherlock and Watson see this thing and they're just like, it's real. Oh. And it's this shocking moment. It's beautiful. I think the whole atmosphere of the entire story is just, generic word for good, fascinating. This edition also has The Valley of the Fear, but I don't think chronologically that's next. It is the next sort of full-length novel, but I think in between these two releases is The Return of Sherlock Holmes, which I have now bought, and I'll read, next year sometime. And that'll have the actual Return from the Dead of Sherlock Holmes, which for the life of me, I don't know why they just have a story that old. It wasn't just I've already said I've said everything that needs to be said. This video is too long already. It's going to be like an hour. Who actually wants to sit through this? I don't have that. I'm not that good at reviewing things, so this is just a waste of everyone's time, especially mine. Because I have plenty of things I could do. I could be reading another book right now because I'm better than you because I read. Unless you read more than me, then you're a nerd who needs to just grow up. In October, I read 2 books, Dusty and The Queen's Gambit. This version has 2 books, Dusty and Magi. I just read Dusty. It's a very old book that I've had since I was a child. I think my grandparents gave it to me. I don't know if it was me nan or me pa, or it may have just been from both of them combined. I can't remember. But I read this as a child, Dusty. I never actually read Magi. I think I started it, and I only got a few chapters in and put it on hold. Magi was about a cow, but Dusty was about a dog, a half dingo, which is a wild dog, and a half, what was it? It was a kelpie, right? It was a farm dog, basically. So there's sort of these two dueling natures. You got the wild dingo nature that wants to kill the farmer's cattle, that the farmer's got to fight off and try and get rid of these dingoes, set traps and stuff. And then you've got the domesticated farm dog that's a working dog that's going to, round up the sheep for the farmer. He's a farm dog. He's the, and you've got these dueling personalities within this dog that's just the dog, But anyways, I read it as a child and very much enjoyed it, so I wanted to reread it. I actually started rereading it back in 2018, I think. But I only got a few chapters in and then put it on hold. So finally I went back to it and said, fuck it, I want to fucking read this book. So I started from scratch again from the very start and read it. And I fucking love it. The perspectives sort of shift. Often the story is told through Dusty's eyes, so you get him experiencing things as a dog and he doesn't quite understand what's going on. And while we as people can understand, we can see sort of from his perspective how he can misinterpret things and not understand things. I think it's very well written in that respect. Some points are told from his owner, Tom, who's sort of a farmhand who lives and works on a farm for this family. Told from his perspective, and he's trying to train Dusty, and we see the way Dusty reacts to things that he does. And it's told from Tom's perspective, where we see Dusty acting peculiar, but we sort of can understand what Dusty's thinking, cross-reference with the way he acts and the way, Dusty thinks. Dusty's, that's the dog. Did I mention that? Dusty's thoughts aren't too complex, He's not fucking Daffy Duck, who's an animal, but just he talks and walks and acts like a human. Obviously, it's a realistic story. He's a dog, but also even his thought process isn't like super complex to the point where it's like, I don't think dogs are thinking on that level. It is more simplistic and more natural and just instinctively like recognizing things even if he doesn't quite understand them, and the way it interprets, I think it's very well written and realistically written as much as it could be. I mean, we don't really know what's going on in a dog's head, but I think this does a pretty good portrayal of it, and it's just a pretty accurate and raw, that's a good descriptive word, it's pretty accurate and realistic and raw portrayal of a farm dog and the farm life. And the complication being the half a dingo inside him that he's got that split in his mind, and it's going to create a lot of problems for him and for the people around him. And it's tragic in many ways and very sad. I mean, anything with an animal is always going to be sad, It's set in Australia. It's a very Australian book, a lot of little Australianisms throughout, but it's one of my favourite books of all time. And rereading it definitely reinforced that. I would definitely strongly recommend you check it out, because I think it's really good and it deserves to be read more by more people. Also read The Queen's Gambit. Last year? No, I think 2021 I watched The Queen's Gambit. I really enjoyed it. This year I got The Queen's Gambit. I got this for my birthday, and most of the books I get either from people or by myself, it's like an average waiting time of 4 years before I actually get around to reading it. But this one, it was less than 4 months and I got around to reading it. I think it's very, I think it's very good. Guess what? Shocker, I enjoyed it. But I think it's pretty damn accurate to the to the series. There's a few changes, and I think the changes the show made are actually worse. Like, a big one to me is when she faces against, what's his name? Borgov, the big Russian guy. The first time she faces him, I think in Mexico, she loses and she's distraught. But then she faces him again in, is it Paris or somewhere? But in the show, she has this meeting with some woman and she gets all drunk or whatever and off her head the night before. And then she rocks up late to the game. And I do like how that game's shot when she's like drinking the water and it's got the clicking noises and it's showing the big board clicking through. I like how it's shot. But yeah, she's basically drunk and she loses. And that starts a downward spiral of her getting drunk all the time. And I don't know, I think it sort of devalues it, the fact that she lost. Because it's like, well, she only lost because she was drunk. But in the book, she shows up prepared. She's been studying with Benny for months and she shows up prepared as she can be. And she still just gets squashed. And that crushes her. And that's what sends her on the downward spiral. And I think that's much more powerful, you know. Because just because you train and put in effort doesn't mean you're going to win. Also, Towns is not as important in the book. After he takes the photos of her in her room, which I think in the show a guy shows up and infers that Towns is actually gay. That the gay part doesn't happen in the book, but also after he takes the pictures of her, I don't think he's ever seen again after that. She thinks of him a couple of times, but towards the end, she thinks of him the last time, and then she's like, no, actually, I wish Benny was here with me in Russia, and she clearly has affections for Benny, it seems. Also, there's a part early on where she calls Jolene the N-word, because Jolene calls her a cracker, and then she says the N-word back. That wasn't in the Netflix series. I wonder why. I love the visuals of the show, but the little changes and kind of the big changes, like with that second Borgov game, really do make me like the book more, but I think they're both fantastic and they're both worth checking out. In November, I read 2 books. I Had That Same Dream Again and Letter from an Unknown Woman and Other Stories. As previously mentioned, I read the I Had That Same Dream Again manga adaptation last year, and it was my favourite thing I read all year. So this year I decided, fuck it, I'm going to read the original novel. Once again, I think it's pretty similar to the manga and the original source material. There's not that many differences that I can recall. I have to reread the manga again to really remember. Yeah, it's really enjoyable. It reinforced my love for the story as a whole. Honestly though, I feel like out of the 2, I may have slightly preferred the manga version more. I don't know if it's just because I read it first and so I didn't know any of the twists in that. But I cried deeply at the manga, and the twist, when it hit me, I was like, oh. Whereas in the book, I may have just teared up a little. It wasn't as impactful, but it's hard to tell if that's because I knew about it, although, like, that may be part of it, but I do think the manga does a really good job of slowly revealing things. Anyway, yeah, I think this really reinforces I like Yoru Sumino's works. I'll probably read some more Yoru Sumino works next year, but yes. Also read Letter from an Unknown Woman and Other Stories. It's another one by Stefan Zweig. I enjoyed the game of chess so much I decided to get this one. It's another collection of 4 short stories. So you got Letter from an Unknown Woman, a story told in twilight, The Debt Played Late, and Forgotten Dreams. I definitely think a story told in twilight is the worst. It's not bad, but it's just the worst out of the 4. My favourite one, I'm not sure. Letter from an Unknown Woman was really good, and The Debt Paid Late was somewhat similar. I mean, not really, but there were some initial connections, but they took very different ways. About a woman sort of being obsessed with a man, but they went in very different ways. Where the first one, A Letter from an Unknown Woman, was all about that obsession. Whereas the other one, it was like, this was someone that I had, an obsession with, but I've moved on. Whereas the first one never moved on, but the second one, in The Debt Paid Late, moved on. It was more about the guy who used to be a somewhat of a big shot, and now he's just the town drunk, and his ruined reputation. And she does a very nice thing for him, and it's very heartwarming and fascinating. I mean, Stefan Zweig is a really good storyteller, I think. Forgotten Dreams is very short, but very fascinating. The woman in that has an aura about her that's intoxicating. There's a lot of female-focused stories in this one. I'm not sure which is my favourite. Probably the debt. Actually, yeah, I think it would definitely be The Debt Paid Late. But Letter from an Unknown Woman and Forgotten Dreams are both phenomenal stories as well. I'll definitely be reading more Stefan Zweig next year, I think. He's becoming a bit of a favourite of mine. And in December, I read 2 books, kinda. Al Changed the World and A Christmas Memory. Al Changed the World is a Death Note, light novel. It's a sort of a spin-off alternate story. And I say kinda because I'm actually still halfway through reading this one. I haven't finished it, but I intend on finishing it within the next few days. Probably just before Christmas. So I can't really say too much about it. But so far, I'm not really enjoying it that much. It's definitely the worst thing. Now, obviously, like I said, I haven't finished it. I'm not even halfway through yet. So it's I'm being a little unfair on it. But so far, it's by far the worst thing I've read all year. I also am comparing it a lot to a book I read last year, a light novel, another Death Note spin-off, the Los Angeles BB Murder Cases, which I thought was fantastic. And comparatively, I think that the Los Angeles BB Murder Cases was way better than this has been so far. This one, even the writing, I don't know if it's the translation, or it seems a lot more basic and just a little all over the place, and I don't really know. It's not connecting with me at all. Once I actually finish it, I'm sure maybe I'll have a little more better things to say about it. Maybe I am just being too unfair on it. But, it has a beautiful cover. I'll give you that. Nice hardcover. It's got like a clear slipcase that has the title on it. I don't know where that is. We don't need to see it. Then we also have A Christmas Memory, which I'm counting because that makes 18 books, but I haven't even started this one. But I was saving it. I was going to read it around Christmas time, probably between Christmas and New Year's. I'll get some time and I'll read this. It's pretty short, so I'm pretty confident I'll be able to read it. It's by Truman Capote, the guy that did Breakfast at Tiffany's. That's why I decided to check this out. I also heard good things about this. And it's a really nice looking release. I like that cover, and it's got some red under there. I think it's going to be either a tragic or bittersweet sort of story. And as I open there, it says right there, tender and bittersweet. These 3 interlinked stories. Let's not read any more. It's best to go in as blind as possible, I think, for most books. Just experience. I haven't even started reading this one, so it's possible I could die within the next few days, or I could, finally decide to fake my death within the next few days and not actually read this. But yeah, I intend on reading it before the end of the year, but I haven't read it yet, so I can't actually give any insight on it. Not that I've given much insight on any of the other books I've read, but yeah. So that's it. That's everything I read this year. This was a lot longer video than I hoped. I think we're going to be over an hour, unfortunately, but who cares? I'll probably do another video like this next year. And also, as I said, in the first week or 2 of January, I will release my manga reading log, which will just be me cataloguing, reading out every single thing I read and each day that I read it. Mostly focusing on manga, but I will mention which days I read, the books and any comics if I read them. And it'll just be, some chill music in the background, the covers, some nice visuals of the volume covers popping up, and it'll probably be as long as this one, nearly an hour, but I won't actually be giving any insight of how I felt about it or any talk about the plot. I feel like there was more I wanted to say about some of these books, like more analysis or review, but once I start recording and time's ticking and I get distracted and I don't know what's going on, and I get a bit of an idiot I am. So things just fall out of my ears and I forget to put them back in, and instead of falling out of my mouth, these thoughts, they fall out of my ears and just I accidentally step on them later and they get crushed and I forget all about it. So I don't know if this was at all interesting or not, but next year I'm going to continue. I'll still read heaps of manga, but I also want to continue reading books frequently because I enjoy them, and it's sometimes, even though I enjoy them, it's easy to get like sidetracked and just put them off. Like, it's so daunting to start, and that's like I mentioned earlier. There's some longer books like American Psycho and maybe the Iliad and the Odyssey they have that just looking at the sheer size of them, it's intimidating. I want to read them. Even if I read, I'll probably read less than 18 books next year. Reading a little bit each day, it might take me a whole month or two to read some of these fucking mammoth books. But as long as I'm reading consistently, it's not about the number of books. Like, sure, I could read a bunch of fucking super small books. It'd take me a couple of days to read. Read like 3 of them a month and get fucking 30 books in. But it's not the same, it's just stat maxing. We don't want to be doing that. We actually just want to read stories that I'm interested in and want to read and experience them and enjoy them. And I want to stop putting off some of these longer stories that I've already bought the books for. Is sort of a goal. I don't think I have an actual set number that I want to read. I guess I would just say, I think even reading longer ones, I can still do at least one book a month. So I guess we'll set the target at 12. It seems to pale in comparison when I read 18 this year, but I mean, one of the ones I read was tiny. This was read in like less than an hour, so the numbers are irrelevant. The point, the important thing is the reading and the enjoying the reading. And that was the gayest statement of all time. I'll say that was the F-word _ statement of all time. But it was sincere. Mostly. I'm just sort of rambling now. The video's been over. It doesn't need to be any longer. It's more than long enough. So I don't really have anything else to say. What did you read this year? Did you read any books or manga? I would love to hear about it in the comments below. What did you think of some of the books I read? Have any of them you've read previously in other years that you have thoughts about, that you either agree or disagree with me? Or did any of the things interest you? Do you have anything to say? Just leave a comment and I will read it. Because I read things. Because I'm better than you. That's what this video is all about. Bragging about reading.